Hi, everyone. This is an introduction to Greek theater, which includes Greek tragedy and Greek comedy. You're going to be watching and paying attention to the slides, what I'm saying, and then there will be questions along the way. So please pay very close attention. Also, remember that with Edpuzzle, if you didn't get, the information you needed for the question, you can hit that little rewind squiggle button on the bottom and re-listen so that you can answer the question correctly. So please take your time so you can do well. Listen, follow along, so you can get the questions right and understand everything about Greek theater. Okay, so Greek tragedies and comedies were always performed in outdoor theaters. So this really started outside as something to honor certain gods or certain heroes. And it happens that it started probably like on a hillside somewhere where people could sit on a hillside and then people could perform and sing at the end of the hillside and everyone could watch, right? So from late 6th century BC to about 4th and 3rd century BC, it was a gradual evolution, right? Those big, beautiful Greek theaters that we see in pictures really didn't come into play until much later as the theaters and the tragedies themselves and the performances evolved. Okay, so here's a Greek timeline. The main thing that I want to show you here for you to understand is to think about the timeline as a number line, right? So AD, so in the Western world, right, the way we measure our time is based on, the Western belief of Christianity, right? So it's believed that time started in terms of the modern era, the AD era, the era that we're in, at 0 when Christ was born, right? Anything after that is called AD, right? Prior to that, it's called ancient history, right? And it's called BC, right? So for you to get an idea of how old these plays are, you really have to go back in time. The other thing is, remember, if you're thinking about this as a number line, 0 is the beginning point for all the positive numbers, and we go up in those numbers. And then anything below 0, right, you go backwards, right? So the smaller the number, like this one, 776 BC, right? The farther away it is from 0, right? The higher numbers would be here, near 0. So if you look at this Greek timeline, we're talking 776 years before, according to Western belief, Christ was born, right? So if Christ was born in 0 and we're marking time for 0, think about this is the year 2021. Think about how many years since 0 it's been, right? So that is, 2021 years roughly, right? And then on top of that, let's think about the first Olympic Games that were played 776 BC, right? So 776 BC from the year 0, right? So we would add an additional, 776 years to our 2020 to know how many years it's been since the first Olympic Games were played. So this is how old and ancient these plays are. That's really what I want you just to understand, that we're looking at relics, we're looking at things that really developed Western society. So let's talk about the evolution here, right? A lot of these are markers of, Greek history. So this is the first Olympic Games, 750, early Greek culture. Greek Homer writes the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So in freshman year, you might have read those. 490, the Greeks defeat the Persians in the Battle of the Marathon. 450, and so on, right? So around 450, that's where we want to focus, because Athens is the center of Greek theater, and Athens becomes a very powerful city and controls the empire. the way Greece was broken up, it was one country, but there were a lot of city states, right? And the two major powers in that city state was Athens, known for its culture, money, and power, right? And Sparta. Sparta was a military city and was very, very powerful. So this is the culture we're looking at in early Greek theaters, right? Athens is the center of the Greek Empire, right? And this is when Greek theater starts to thrive under that money and that power and that culture, right? 450 BC, Greek theater thrives in Athens. Many of the most famous Greek plays are written, and it's around this time that the plays that we're going to read are based, right? Right around this time. Now, things start to fall apart around 431 with the war between Athens and Sparta. Around 404, Sparta beats Athens, defeats them, right? And remember that Sparta is a military power, so they weren't that focused on culture. But then along come the Romans, right, and conquer Greece, and it's the end of the Greek Empire, but they steal everything from the Greeks, right? So if you go, to Rome and you see those theaters, if you look at their plays, if you look at their gods, all of that is stolen from the Greeks. So the influence, and so on goes our modern history, right? As one country or empire conquered the other, these traditions, these aspects of our culture, the idea of theater and art is passed down, changed, but passed down. This is the theater of Epidaurus. I just wanted you to see what a Greek theater might have looked like. This was built later on when Greek theater was popular, and that's why it looks as good as it does. You can go to Greece and visit this theater. It's one of my dreams to be able to do this. I'll show you a nice picture of it at night. But I also want you to pay attention to how this is built, right? It's outside, like all Greek theaters are, and I want you to pay attention to the where the people are sitting, right? Where the action is happening, the fact that you have these mountains in the backdrop. There would have been something back here also. So that's what we're going to talk about now, right? The Greek theater main components, right? So where the people are sitting here, right? That's called the theatertron. So if we go back, right, that's this part here. I want you to think about why the Greek theater was built that way. Why do you think we have this, people down here on the bottom and then going up on the top? And my question is, does it remind you of anything in our modern world today? And that will help you with the answer. So here we have the theatertron with the lowest seats being closest to the orchestra. So the theatertron is literally called the watching place, right? The orchestra is literally called the dancing place. And we'll talk about why that is, right? The scene or scene is the backdrop. So people are sitting here watching. In the orchestra, we have the action happening, the singing, the performing, and this is the backdrop, the scene. So here are your definitions. Orchestra, a circular level space where the chorus would dance and sing, interact with actors. Theatertron is the viewing place. This is where spectators sat. The theatertron was usually part of a hillside overlooking the orchestra. Skene literally means tent. It was directly in back of or behind the stage, and it was usually decorated as a palace or temple or other building, depending on what they needed for the play, depending on what the story needed as a background, all right? It had at least one set of doors, and actors would make entrances and exits through them. The parados is called the passageway, the path by which the chorus and some actors made their entrances and exits. The audience also used them to enter and exit the theater before and after the performance. And here's the parados, right? Remember, this is an aerial view. The theatertron, the orchestra, and the skene. Remember those terms. Now let's talk about the Theater of Dionysus. This is what it looked like. It's probably the most famous, developed theater in Athens. And the first plays were performed in the Theater of Dionysus, and it was built in the shadow of the Acropolis, where it was the center of Athens. In Athens at the beginning of the 5th century. So remember, we're talking BC here, right? So 500 years, roughly, give or take, before our year zero in modern times. These theaters proved to be so popular, they soon spread all over Greece. Now think about if this is built right in the middle of the city, in the shadow of, city government and power, and it's right at the center of all of this. My question is, how important was Greek theater and this Theater of Dionysus to Greek life in Greek culture? And this is what the Theater of Dionysus looks like now. So we're talking about modern times, of course. We are in 2021, and then you go back another 450 years, right? So we're talking about a theater that's almost 3,000 years old. So that's why it looks like that. These metal bars and all that, that's, an attempt to keep it from completely crumbling. They're trying to restore parts of it. And this is still someplace that if you go to Greece, you can visit. So here is Dionysus. The theater was named after him because in Greek mythology, Dionysus was the god of creativity, of wine, of fertility. Reverie means, partying, being happy. And so he was the party god, guys. He was really the party god, right? Because he's attached to wine, he's attached to fertility and creativity. He is the god of theater. He ultimately is the god of theater, right? Now, he's also the only god that is born of a god and a mortal parent. Okay. So the story of Dionysus was that he was raised by satyrs. Hera, Zeus's wife, found out that he had this child with a mortal, with a woman, right? So Zeus, in order to protect the child, takes the child into the woods so that the satyrs could raise him. But somehow she found him and she has him killed and dismembered. Dismembered means that you cut you dismember a chicken, you cut the pieces apart. So he was dismembered. But Zeus realizes that people are so broken by the death of Dionysus, right? He was supposed to be beautiful and just charismatic and, party person, a creative person, that he resurrects him. But when he resurrects him, he's not a demigod. He's not half human and half God. He is completely 100% a God, right? So that's something else that makes him special, that he started out as a demigod and is resurrected and reborn as a complete God. Other gods had temples, but the people who followed Dionysus, the cult of Dionysus, they met in the woods, right? Because it was all about liberation and free spirit and creativity, right? It was believed that he could liberate and inspire human beings. It was also believed that he can endow, he can give the gift of, right? To endow means to give a gift. He could give the gift of divine creativity. So because of this, he became the patron of the arts because of his power to give creativity and his free spirit. So the city of Dionysa was a festival for performances, right? In the 6th century, the Athenian ruler Pisistratus established the city of Dionysus. It was a festival of entertainment, and it was all in honor of Dionysus, the god of creativity, the god of theater, right? This festival featured competitions in music, singing, dance, and poetry. Um, One of the most remarkable winners was what they call a wandering bard, but it was a bard just means an actor, guys, named Thespis, right? And Thespis was one of the great actors of his time, right? And does it remind you of anything, right? The modern word for an actor, right, is a thespian. So, right, relating to drama, right? So that's why we still honor this man with that word being named after him. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 qualities of Greek drama, right? And the city of Dionysa. When these festivals were held, right, there were 4 things that were included in these festivals to worship Dionysus. The first thing is that they were performed for special occasions, the festivals that we were talking about, right? So the actual city, Athens, changed its name from the city of Athens to the city of Dionysa in honor of these festivals, 4 of them in the year, to worship Dionysus. So it's a festival, but it's also the fact that the city itself changes its name. Think about how important this festival, the culture of theater and the arts was in ancient Greece, if the city itself changed its name to the city of Dionysa, right? So the first thing is that they were held on special occasions, right? The second thing is that they were competitive. So prizes were awarded. Actors and playwrights competed to write the best play, the best actor, and then the judges would decide who was the winner. Oedipus, which is one of the plays that we will be reading, won second place at the time. So the second thing is that it is competitive. The third thing is that it's choral. Choral, just like we think about choruses now, there was singing. The chorus was made up of men from 3 to 50, could be a very big chorus. The chorus sang, moved, and danced. They moved the story along. So think of the chorus as a community. We'll talk more about that. And they're always present while the action is going on. And then the fourth quality is that the stories were based on myth or history, right? Greek myths or Greek history. So look at these, because I will be asking you next, what are some of these qualities, to see if you can remember that they were performed on special occasions, they were competitive, they were choral, they were singing and dancing on stage, and the stories were based on myth or history. Comedy and tragedy were the most popular types of plays in ancient Greece. So comedy at that time wasn't necessarily like ha funny comedy, right? It was just a happy ending. That's really what it meant. Tragedy, obviously, the name says it all, a very sad ending, and we'll talk about what that means and what happens, to our hero. And then starter plays were performed in between acts or in between plays. And they were like funny, raunchy plays based on, who the starters were and this funny aspect about them. Okay, so let's talk specifically about tragedy, because this is what we're going to be reading. So tragedy dealt with love, loss, pride, the abuse of power, right? There's this very difficult relationship between the men or the humans and the gods. The main protagonist is called a tragic hero, right? He commits, a terrible crime. A lot of the times it's not even his or her fault, right? And they don't realize how foolish and arrogant they've been. Then, slowly, as the drama continues, they realize their error, and the entire world crumbles around them. Everything that they held dear is lost, right? There are three great playwrights of tragedy: Achilles, Sophocles, and Euripides. The play we're going to be reading is all Sophocles. So, our protagonist in tragedy is called a tragic hero. And the tragic hero has 6 characteristics. The first one is high social standing. Usually, this protagonist is a royal, a king, a great soldier, somebody who has a high position in society. The second characteristic is called hamartia, right? Some people say hamartia, some people say hamartia. This has 2 meanings. The first meaning is that the hero has a tragic flaw, like all of us do, but because it's, a hero, it's exaggerated. This tragic flaw is a weakness in character. For example, the hero might have hubris, which is pride. He's a very prideful person. He might be stubborn. He might be greedy. So even though he's a hero, this flaw is his weakness. And this is really the thing that's going to destroy the hero. The second translation of hamartia or hamartia is a tragic error. The hero made a terrible mistake, usually not even his or her fault. It's due to fate and the gods, and this demonstrates the ignorance of the hero. All right? And then the fourth characteristic is character, human character, right? We've got someone that we can relate to here. The hero is neither a highly moral, like overly good, right? Someone that you can't relate to because they're so good, or a really evil person. Basically, the hero is decent and good and tries to do the best that they can, which, most human beings try. So your first 4 characteristics are high social standing, hamartia, right? Actually, this is 1, 2, 3. Hamartia is second, and that's the translation of tragic flaw or tragic error. And the third characteristic is human character, right? So hamartia falls under the 2, tragic flaw, or it could be a tragic mistake, right? So that makes it 1, high social standing, and human character. Those are the first 3 characteristics of your tragic hero. The last 3 characteristics are the fact that the hero has a tragic fall, right? Remember, they start off with high social standing. And so because of this error or because of this, character flaw, they lose everything they hold dear, right? Their position and anything that they love and hold dear, they lose it, right? And the hero goes through great suffering, right? It's great suffering because the hero suffers, but because this person is, such a high, looked up to position in society, has influence in society, when he or she suffers, everybody around the hero also suffers, right? His people, his family, his friends. So we call this great suffering. And then the last thing that makes the tragic hero really important or different, which is almost the point of a lot of these plays, is this reversal and recognition. So this is a moment where the hero recognizes that they've made a terrible mistake, whether it was his or her own fault or the fault of, fate itself run by the gods. This is like a terrible moment for them, right? And they're like, oh my God, this is my fault. So without reversal and recognition, a hero, a tragic hero, not a regular hero, right? A tragic hero cannot be a tragic hero. We must have that moment of recognition and reversal where they say, it was all my fault. I did the wrong thing here. I can't. Okay, guys, so let's go over Aristotle's definition of tragedy. Aristotle was a great philosopher of his time, and he studied many aspects of culture. And we'll talk more about him when we're doing other things later on in class. But he actually was around after this great era of Greek tragedy. And so there was a time period there, about 100 years or so, between this definition and when tragedy was being performed often. And by looking at the tragedies, he came up with this definition, right? Tragedy then is an imitation of an action that is serious. So an imitation, that's acting, right? You're acting. That's why it's an imitation. What's going on is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, right? Magnitude meaning it's really important, right? The message here is very important, the one that's being communicated. And it's also a big show, right? Because it's being performed as a big show. In language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament. So artistic ornament is just everything that we've been learning about language, right? Similes, metaphors, personifications. And then if you read this in the Greek, you could understand that this is poetic, right? It's being done with a certain rhythm. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it's being sung and performed, a lot of it, right? In the form of action, not a narrative, right? So it's not a story that we're reading. People are actually acting this out, right? And through pity and fear, affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. So when we watch this tragedy, right, we should feel pity and we should feel fear, right? Pity for our tragic hero and fear for what has happened to him or her. And, we're learning a lesson here through this fear, right? And so this purgation means to clean out, right? So you should have a catharsis, purgation of emotions. So a catharsis is a cleansing, right? So while you're watching this, you feel pity, you might cry with the hero. If it's well done, you're feeling all the emotions that the hero is feeling, right? And then you also feel the fear. So what Aristotle is saying here is that by watching these tragedies, we're learning, right, what is the message, but we are also cleansing ourselves of those emotions. By crying along and feeling this fear, we're cleansing ourselves of those emotions. So think about when you see a movie that really affects you, right? And even though you may not cry in the theater or at home, but you definitely feel those emotions and you walk away feeling like, wow, that was amazing. Like you were on this ride with the protagonist. So that's the idea here, right? And the pity and the fear really has to do with the gods, right? And what's happening with them and what are the lessons being taught here. Okay, guys, so for this part of the lesson, we're going to end it here. And I want you to think about what you've learned. There will be a part 2 coming up that we'll do later this week. But I just want you to understand the basics of Greek tragedy. Make sure to rewatch anything that you didn't, get correctly and do the best you can answering the questions. And I'll do part 2 later on this week because this is very long. All right, take care and I'll see you in class.